Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, which is brought to you by First Light. I'm your guest host, Tony Peterson, and today I'm joined by my good buddy Clint Campbell to talk about his quest this season to kill a legitimate 200-inch deer on public land. I know you noticed that this isn't Mark Kenyon. He's not here today. It's your old third stringer, Antonio. Mark is off, actually recovering from a pretty nasty throat injury. You guys might not know this, but Mark is actually a very accomplished clarinet player. Well, he was wailing away the other day when one of those little Kenyan boys chucked a football in his direction. I'll spare you the details, but I'll just say it was a direct hit, and now Mark has to eat ice cream and applesauce for a while. Hopefully he heals up soon, though, because we don't want him to suffer anymore. And plus, I'm pretty sick of doing not only my job, but most of his. My guest today is a good friend of mine, Clint Campbell. Clint is a really good hunter who also happens to be the host of the Truth from the Stand podcast. Clint had the opportunity to hunt a very rare deer this year on public land, a buck that he's known about for a few years, a legitimate 200-inch type buck. It's truly incredible. So in this show, we're going to dive deep into that story and go even deeper into the reality of not only finding giant bucks on public land, but what to do if you do manage to locate one. Clint, buddy, I feel like I needed to do this podcast with you sort of as a wellness check. You're hanging in there?
I'm hanging in there, man. I'm okay. You know, things are they were bleak for a moment. You know, my buddy sent a text about that deer, and there were a couple of us that knew about him and stuff like that. And of course, you know, look, it's deer hunting, right? And deer get killed, and you know, sometimes they get killed by people, sometimes they get killed by cars. Like, you know, sometimes you just don't see them; they die of old age, right? So I try not to get too precious on a deer, and I tried to play it off with my buddies where I was like, it's just a deer, you know, and stuff like that. And then my buddy reminded me, he's like, dude, you've been living in your truck, in your trailer for like, you know, 30 days or whatever, essentially, roughly, you know, since October 5th. I have basically hunted this particular deer every possible moment you could get there, chasing weather fronts and stuff like that. He's like, so don't give me that BS. You know, so I was like, and then my response back to him was like, I'm not crying, you're crying. Like,
so let's talk about this deer, because you sent me a trail camera video, I don't know, week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago or something, of a legit giant that you had found on public land. We don't need to get into the details, other than you found one in a probably 5 million buck. I mean, the level of that deer is unreal. I mean, if that deer walked out in front of Lee Lakoski, he'd shoot it on site on his home farm, right? You know, and he's making it to an old age on public land, and you put in like you mentioned some real time onto this deer, and you just found out just a couple days ago that deer is dead.
Yeah, he's dead. You know, we knew of him. And so it wasn't just me, it was me and two of my buddies. And I think truthfully, the first time we knew of that deer was my one buddy had a trail camera picture of him. And I had trail cameras. Like, so I have two friends that we all kind of hunt the same general area, right? And we try not to step on each other's toes and stuff like that. But what we do, because this is like a huge piece of, you know, mountain ground and big woods, is that we pull a lot of our intel together, because it's a little bit of ways away from me, from where I live. It's a little bit of a ways away from like our one buddy, and our other buddy kind of lives pretty local. And so a lot of times I would have asked them to check trail cameras if they run by one of mine or whatever, and just like check it and pull the card and like send me some pictures or whatever's good on it and stuff like that. And so our one buddy actually had this deer on camera probably 2 years ago, and I had some cameras around there too. And then coincidentally also picked him up on a couple of different cameras. And so we knew of him for probably 3-ish years. I guess this would have been the third year. I mean, we probably had him prior to that before he was really identifiable, but it was probably 3 seasons ago that he was really identifiable, where he showed up and it was like, oh, that's a good buck. Like, he's probably like, at that year, he was probably like 150 inches, you know? And there wasn't really a whole lot I could do about it, because I was hunting Kansas like the past several years. You know, and so I was going to have that tag in my pocket. I knew I was going to be leaving at the end of October for the first couple of weeks in November. And so this place is, unless you really have time to dedicate to try to hunt October, it hunts really, really hard in general. But it hunts exponentially harder in October because they can bed pretty much anywhere. There's no agriculture, so there's no defined destination food sources that you can kind of play like a bed to food game and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean
And so,
this is true big woods.
yeah, true big woods. The deer don't live in every section of it, right? There's certain pieces that you might go to that you would think a deer never crossed that area in the entire existence of that piece of dirt. You know what I mean? Like just
Right.
by the nature of the way the habitat kind of lays out and stuff. And so we knew of him for a couple years, and he was around again last year. And last year I think is really whenever I kind of took notice of. I think we all did because he was a big deer, but it wasn't like we were kind of exclusively hunting him. And I think I had 2 hunts there last year, and I had an awkward, like a weird, I won't say awkward, but I had a weird encounter in super early October. And then it wasn't until after the season that I realized that encounter that I had in the sign that I'd found in the proximity to where this deer was kind of showing up on trail camera. And I actually had a picture of him the day, it was either the day before, I think it was the day before I hunted that area. I didn't find any of this out until postseason because I went in and pulled the cameras and stuff like that. I killed a buck in PA local to me like mid-October, so I didn't make it back there to hunt. And this was like October 5th or 6th or something like that, when I had this kind of weird encounter. And then when I did my postseason scouting, my buddy and I were out scouting, and sure enough, found like a pretty good rub about where I kind of heard this vocalization, and then there was a really big scrape that wasn't far away from that. And so a lot of the dots started kind of connecting a little bit. And it was just a matter of like, wonder if he's going to show up, right? There was a second one that was kind of a really interesting deer. And that was probably the one that really piqued my interest. And that deer was actually the one that really helped me start to try to piece the puzzle together as far as like how deer really use this area. And then this deer that subsequently he recently got killed that I was chasing, he showed back up and became even more visible than he had been in the past couple of years in a bunch of different areas on a bunch of different cameras and a bunch of different kind of sections of this piece. And that was kind of when, for me at least, I was like, all right, this year I'm going to dedicate. I don't do it really ever, hunt a specific deer. I'm more of a, hey, if there's an area that has a couple good deer, I'm going to hunt this area on volume, and hopefully one of these 3 or 4 good deer that I like, maybe they pass by. But this was like an instance where I was like, I'm not going to very often have an opportunity to hunt a deer of this caliber. Certainly not in the state of Pennsylvania on public land. And so I was like, you know what? I had a great season last year, filled 2 tags, killed a booner, so I was like, this is a great year to just kind of let a mature deer try to teach me some lessons, if I don't fill a tag. And then, I'll get to chase a really kind of unique mature deer around the woods for as long as I can and kind of see how they live and how they act. And, and hopefully it'll make me a better hunter as I kind of continue to go. And so that was kind of the goal overall.
I mean, so let's back up here a second. So this buck, you found him, or he kind of got on your radar 3 years ago.
And it was 3 seasons ago. Yeah.
Right. He was pushing 150. So let's say for the last 5 years, for sure, that deer walks by 99.9% of the hunters out there, he gets shot at.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, for sure.
I would just think that that's like very, very likely. And by 4 years ago, for sure, that would be the case. And he survives. And here's something, this is part of what I wanted to talk to you about, is it's cool as hell to have that opportunity and find that deer of that caliber. I mean, you're talking a deer that's right at the 200-inch mark all day long, which is just bananas, right? Mm-hmm. But also the fact that deer probably had a better chance to reach his full potential by being in that big wood setting on public land versus spending his time. If he had spent more time on private land with any level of hunting pressure, he would have been so well known.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he certainly wasn't, he wasn't a celebrity, but there was a lot more people that knew of him than just us. Like I met some guys while I was there. They, and I told my one buddy this, that, I stopped and talked to him because my one buddy killed a good buck, and he sent me a message on his like satellite device, and I wasn't sure what time it came in. So I saw a truck that I thought was his pulled off, and it happened to be these other 2 dudes, and they recognized my truck somewhere, and they're like, hey, you hunting that big one? So like right there, I was like, all right, so it's not just me and two of my buddies. It's like me, two of my buddies, these two guys. And then I knew my other buddy knew that there was a couple guys on this one piece of private that wasn't far away that was also knew of him. Right. And so I'm like, I know at least like 7 or 8 guys probably know of this deer, like within the area. And then just the number of trucks that you would see kind of in that area kind of told you that there was more than that. Right.
Right.
But you're right. Like this area hunts, you know, he was definitely aided by the fact that it's a big woods setting. He's not on private and he's in an area that doesn't have a lot of structure. So there's not a lot of defined areas that are like real obvious places that you should set up, right? Like there's not like um, he's going to have to cross this saddle or anything like that, right? Like there's not a lot of topography change and stuff like that. And so you're really kind of relegated to try to get into areas where you're using habitat, almost like structure, like soft edges and stuff like that they're going to want to travel and things like that. And that, again, that's why it hunts tough, and that's why it hunts better in November than it does in October, because you really just kind of play like where the doe is going to spend time. You find where the thick cover is. There's probably going to be a doe group that's bedding in that general area, and you play those odds, right? And so even when you lay a plan for that area, it's still kind of, if you're hunting a specific deer, it's still a little bit of like a hand grenade toss to a degree, right? Sure. But you use the intel that you have, and the one part that I started feeling good about was I actually saw the deer on the hoof October 12th, and that was kind of like an odd hunt because I just kind of jumped into a tree as it was getting late in the evening, and I knew he was in that general area, but it wasn't like I'm going to sit this tree because I think I can kill him here. It was literally like I need to get into a tree because it's 4:00 and I just need to watch, right? And I just caught a glimpse of him at about 60 yards or so. And then I got some camera intel on him in late-ish October, and that was the part that like he made a rub on camera on video, and I was able to identify the tree and see how he was making rubs. And so from there, it's like I got a real good. He had an interesting antler characteristic that people will make that mistake that big deer rub big trees, or they rub real tall or whatever, right? This rub that he made was maybe only 6 inches long, and it was probably only like 1.5 feet off the ground, right? And so if you looked at that rub, you would think nothing of that caliber of animal was making that rub, right? But the detail he was leaving, he had an interesting antler characteristic on one of his longer tines, and because of the way that tine was, askew, if you will, he was making tick marks that were like 16 inches above where the rub stopped at the bottom, right? And so it was like and that was what I was, when I said, I was going to let a mature deer just kind of teach me some lessons. It's those types of things of paying attention to those small details when you're trying to chase a critter like that, right? That if you can just figure out small things, and it's not going to be like, oh, here's a rub. It's like, no, I was examining every single rub as I was walking through the woods to see if I could find a tick mark that was 16 inches or so above where the rub was at, to know that that was him and he's spending time in this area. So I started finding those, right? And that was kind of how I started putting my plan together. The only bummer is where I got that video, in the off season, I said that would be where I would kill him if I were going to kill him. It was probably the best setup I had, right? Because there was some topography there that was going to make him kind of move in an area. And I heard some fighting on the 25th of October. I heard a buck roar and a buck fight, and I had assumed it was him. And I was a little outside the game one morning, and I was like, the 26th, I'm going to make a move back closer to that. And my thought was I should go to that spot with the topography, and I should sit that. That should be my first sit. And I've debated it, and I debated it. Literally that morning, I got out of my truck, and I was going to walk to that spot. And I was at the last minute, I was like, you know what? I'm going to save that spot for November because I think I'm probably like 4 or 5 days out from it being real good there, right? I was like, I'm going to go in on the west side of this particular kind of terrain feature, and I'm going to set up there, and I'm going to be about 100 yards away from that spot. And so I should catch any of the action that's kind of coming through, but not booger that up. So I should be in the game, but not booger that spot up. And sure as shit, he walked through that spot at 8:14 that morning, And so it's one of those things where it's like, whenever you're hunting a deer like that, you're probably only going to get one crack. Right. And it's, I constantly try to tell myself when I go out of state, I'm aggressive, right? Because I'm only there on short time. And when I hunt in state, a lot of times I'm a little bit more conservative, and I'm trying to like work that out of myself to a degree, right? And this is like a time where it's like, oh, I just would have been aggressive. I mean, like, what, this is a good spot. I'm just going to go there, right? And whatever the results are, they are. And if it's boogered up, it's boogered up. I'll figure it out later. But not being aggressive probably cost me, an opportunity at probably a chip shot, to be honest with you, right? So
that's exactly what I was going to say. Is it is so much easier to the decision making process on the road to me is so much easier than at home because you don't have the luxury of time. Like you don't care if you go in and blow them out. I mean, you do, but it's like doesn't feel the same thing as knowing now you've got 35 days left to hunt and you might not see him again. And you said something there about how, you're only going to get one crack at a deer like that, most likely. That's probably true, but I don't think it has to be. Like when you're on them like that, I think we tell ourselves that sometimes so we feel better about playing it so conservatively and not being so cavalier. But when you see, and you're not the only one. I mean, I know a lot of really good kind of over the road public land hunters who take that aggressiveness on the road, but they really tamp it down when they get home. And it's like it's a mental thing to overcome. But when you're on a deer like that, I mean, that deer clearly spending real time there. I don't know if you bump that deer, I don't know if he's not back there tomorrow because he has a lot of dudes looking for him.
Yeah.
But it's that's such a scary risk to take.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's one of those ones where, I was kicking myself like when I pulled that card and I saw that and I was like, you got to be kidding me, here it was, right? And I really should have probably went and did it for the reason that I was trying to get to Missouri, right? So I usually don't hunt this area. Like I know it hunts tough in October, and I basically chased every cold front in October. And so what I would do, is I would, every Saturday I would go up and I would have jujitsu at night, and I would leave right after jujitsu, and I would drive the couple hours, and I would sleep in the front seat of my truck in a sleeping bag, and I would get up early and I would go hunt a morning set that I thought was pretty good. Um, I would see some deer. I was seeing deer like all October. I passed a deer, on like the 6th or 7th or whatever it was, that I would shoot any other year. Like it's one of those ones where I'm like, I can't believe I just passed that deer. Like, and truthfully, that was the only good buck I had in bow range. Like the whole season was that encounter. And so I would chase. I'd go up Saturday and I hunt the morning, and I would scout and walk like 7-8 miles, whatever it was, until like it started getting dark. And then wherever I happened to be, whenever it was getting dark, is where I would get into a tree. Right. And some of it was checking trail cameras. Someone was putting out some additional trail cameras, looking for sign. I was trying to find a track, cut a track, find a rub, find a scrape with a track in it, like anything, that I could do to try to find him. And so I would do that on Saturdays, and I would basically hunt every cold front that came through. Even minor temp drops. I wasn't looking for like 10 degrees. I was even looking just for like 5-degree changes and stuff like that. Anything that was just like different, and I would go up and take my trailer, and I would, work from it during the day. I'd get up in the morning, hunt the morning till about 9:30, 10 o'clock, come back to the trailer with Starlink, and I would set up and I would work all during the day. Then I would peace out around 3:30 or so and get back to the woods and hunt the evening. Right. And so that was basically all of October. I knew October was kind of really a flyer. Just from trail camera data, I knew that place kind of turned on, like it was a good rut, like piece of dirt, if you will. Right. But I also wanted to kind of like know that I was in the right area when rut kind of kicked off. Right. Cause these deer, I've had so many deer in this area do two different things, right? Like it seems to me like this particular area, like as the deer get older, they become a little bit more homebody-ish, right? And they don't move quite as much. But then there's also like the groups of deer that just completely vanish and disappear. And so I wanted to try to get a good beat on whether or not what deer, and him specifically, if they were still around in October. And the crazy thing was I just had a sneaking suspicion that deer was still around, because I don't know if any of us got any pictures of him. I think the last picture we had of him was like September 21st until like I had him on the 26th. I don't know if any of my other buddies got him on camera like prior to that. But yeah, I mean, he basically
Is that
ghosted for
because a
about a
lot of
month.
people weren't telling the truth in your little circle at that point?
No, I mean, we were all pretty like forthcoming, right? Like, cause when I had that encounter with him, I was talking to my one buddy. And I mean, I told him I had the encounter. I told him where I had the encounter at. It was like, hey, this is where it was at. He and I probably talked more than our other buddy. Our other buddy also just had a baby recently, so like his time getting out. Oddly enough, out of the three of us, he was the only one who killed a buck. Um, so he wasn't getting out nearly as often as like he probably would have in the past years and stuff like that. And so, but my buddy, my one buddy and I think we were sharing pretty freely, like of what we were seeing, what we weren't seeing. If we were cutting a track or not cutting a track or whatever. But yeah, but I mean, I'm sure there was a little bit of secrecy going on. It's like we're all chasing a big deer, and
Didn't you find out though after you found out the buck was dead that one of your buddies had missed him?
yeah, my one buddy actually, it was the day before he killed, he actually shot right under him. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the thing was like my one buddy and I, it's like we had an agreement. It's like, dude, whoever kills this deer, the other guy, we're taking the guy out for like a steak and bourbon dinner or steak and scotch dinner.
Right.
Like that was like
Right.
on the books, because I was like, no matter what, like if one of us gets a crack at this deer and we get him on the ground, like it's just cause for celebration regardless. Right. And I mean, that's just speaks to like having good dudes, around you and stuff like that. So
For sure. So let's back up a second here. If I were to go back, if I were to take you back to Clint Campbell on, let's say, October 1 of this season, and that we're going to ask you, all right, you've got this freaking giant. You've been working him. You've been aware of him a long time. This is your focus for the season. What would you have pegged your odds at of killing that deer?
I mean, when I go into it, like I gave myself 100% because I don't ever like to feel like I'm walking into something and that's going to fail. Right. Like
Right.
if I don't think I'm going to kill him, then why am I hunting him? But that's part of like, just like sports talk, right? It's like any football team. It's like you walk into a game. It's like you could be 0-16 facing the team that's 16-0, and you're like, we're going to win the game, right? Because if you don't think that way, you have no chance, right?
Well, that's what I wanted to get to because you put in real time on this deer, and I've had a few situations in my life where I found a big one. I've talked about it a million times, but I found a booner on public here in the cities one time, hunted him for 30 days, killed his buddy, never saw him again. But it takes that mentality. Like I know, I mean, even though you're kind of tricking yourself, right? Like know that your odds are not 100% that you're going to kill a 200-inch buck on public land in Pennsylvania, right? Like, but
Right.
you have to put in that requisite work to believe in yourself enough to see that process through, even though like the odds are less than 100%. They just are. But if you're believing in the process and what you've put in, that's what keeps you making that drive and sleeping in the truck and doing the scouting and everything. And I think that I think it's easy for people to kind of contextualize that around a buck of 1,000 lifetimes. But if you're just starting out or you've killed a few deer and you want to bump up from, 2.5s to something bigger or whatever, the same rules really kind of apply. Like if you don't put in the work, you're not going to have that belief. You won't hunt as hard. Like you have to have that faith in yourself somehow.
Yeah. You have to fool yourself a little bit. It's the thing that helps you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning every morning. You know what I mean? When you don't want to, right? Especially whenever you're sleeping in the front of your truck, you're tired, you didn't get good sleep. And midday when you're scouting, all you really want to do is go back to the truck and take a nap. You know what I mean? But you're not going to get any closer if you don't put the time in, right? I mean, I felt pretty good about my odds of seeing him. Like I thought that would happen, but I didn't have any delusions of like what this was going to be. I knew that I had a pretty good chance to see him because I thought, in general, me and my two buddies, I thought we were all in the right general area, like to have a visual of him, right? And truthfully, like, like I said, I was 100% because that's how I forced myself to get up and do this every day and like work and do all the things I needed to do. I still trained jujitsu like 3 days a week while I was doing all this. Right. So it's like my life didn't miss much of a beat, while I was doing it. But realistically, I thought it was 50-50. I thought I had a couple places that were one spot in particular that I thought was really dialed if I could time it right. And that was the spot, right? And it was just a matter of like, could I be there when he was going to be there, right? Um, and so realistically, I thought I had a 50% chance. I thought for sure it's like I would see him at some point, whether or not I was going to be close enough to get a shot or not, or at the right spot whenever he was close enough to get a shot, that I was like, it's a kind of a toss up, right? Because, just the way they move on that piece and how far they can move. Like for context, there was a deer that my one buddy and I knew of the previous couple years that we were hunting this other general area, because I hadn't hunted this area until last year at all. Even though I had cameras on it and had been scouting it. And there was one particular deer that, I had an encounter with in an area. And I thought for sure like that general area is where you could kill him. And he got killed also, I think during gun season. And he was killed roughly 4.5, 5 miles as the crow flies from where we had him on camera and where I had an encounter with him. Right. So, the distance that they travel in this general area, I knew that, when you do see him, the chances of him being around there for an extended period of time are probably limited, especially once you got into like the later part of November. Like I figured like that October, early-ish November timeframe was probably like the best time. Once you hit mid-October, I was like, I think he's probably going to really be searching, and then he'll probably make his way back, because I always usually got him again in like late October, early December timeframe, right? And so I knew there was probably like a period of 2 weeks where he's just going to be gone, right? And probably not going to be here. Which is why I kind of put my odds at like 50-50, because that's like, he's not going to spend all his time here. He's going to travel, and I know that. And I know from prior experience, they travel a long distance in this area.
So I think there's something so important to what you just said. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately, where if even if you have that buck's entire home range to hunt, let's say the land that you hunt, he spends 90% of his time there or whatever. Like the time that he's probably going to bounce and leave your world is the time when you can hunt him. And I think that a lot of times, I think this is the blessing and curse of trail cameras, right? Like you use trail cameras to go, here's my window when this giant's going to be here, probably. Here's the window where he's probably just going to light out and go somewhere where I just don't know yet. And they're like very consistent on that. And trail cameras teach you that, but trail cameras can also tell, the average person like, oh, well, you just had a 140 walk through here, twice this week. So like now that becomes your target buck. And that might have been him just like, we literally just had this happen at my buddy's place over in Wisconsin. We had a buck show up for 2 days that was probably pushing 150, beautiful mainframe 10-pointer, just a toad for up there. And then he's gone. And my buddy's like, I'm super excited to go hunt gun season now. And I'm like, that deer's freaking gone, dude. Like that was just him. He followed a doe in, or that was part of his rut route or whatever for a couple days, and he's gone. And I think a lot of people, I think they go into a 1 buck hunt, or they, kind of pin their hopes on a deer that's really totally out of play. I mean, I'll give you another example quick here. I have a property over in Wisconsin that's 28 acres. And one of the neighbors who borders me has like 16 acres, 16. And he's got a food plot in there, whatever, he lives there. He puts a lot of work into this little piece. And we've had a buck the last few years that's a very big non-typical for over there. I mean, probably upper 160s, tons of stickers, really cool deer. But every year you talk to him and this guy is like, stickers is back, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you have 16 acres, man. And you hunt the shit out of it. Like you're not going to kill that deer. Like you can't work that deer using, a fifth, like a hundredth of his home range, a 50th of his home range, whatever. Like there's just no way. But it's like so many people are out there looking at just, maybe a couple pictures or whatever and going there, that's my season. That's what I'm going to do. And hey, that's like, if you want to do that, that's fine. But the more you do the kind of hunting like you're talking about, the more you learn like what's really in play for me and what's not. And a lot of these deer aren't in play that long in a lot of places.
Yeah. To me, in this type of setup or in this type of setting, like if you don't have a couple years of of intel, like trail cameras, scouting, visual on the hoof, like whatever, like you have virtually no chance, right? Just because of how much ground they cover and how many hidey holes they have and things like that. It's a little bit different, like, and it goes back to what we were talking about, what you were talking about at the beginning, which is, part of the reason why I think this deer got to that age is because he lives on a piece of, big woods that he has vast land to travel. He has a lot of places he can hide and a lot of places guys aren't willing to hike to hunt. You know what I mean? So, you know, it gives him the opportunity to grow old. When you have those places that have a lot of structure and things like that, I think, yeah, maybe you don't need as much intel because it's really defined how deer are probably going to move, right?
Right.
You can start to, you know, anticipate where they're going to be and when they're going to be, and like the food is here and the bedding is here and the does live here. It's like when it starts to set up like that, it becomes a little bit easier. But this deer, there was none of that. There was no structure, there was no, and so the only really reason we were able to kind of successfully, I think, kind of stay close to him and know that we were in his core areas because we literally had 3 years of intel of trail cameras of data on him of like being in different places, different times of the year, right? Because that was the biggest thing for me was knowing that he would be in the general area like in the October time frame, right? Or I wasn't going to spend any time hunting him. Like I wasn't going to pin my whole hunt on just trying to hunt him in November and hope that he comes through on a doe during the rut. Like I wasn't gonna do that. I'm not that lucky. You know what I mean? Like we'll just put it that way. I'm not that lucky of a guy, right? So I knew that he was probably still in the area just by like previous years intel, and that I needed to spend my time like trying to like get a visual or cut his sign somewhere, and then getting that visual in mid-October. Like if I didn't see him, didn't have him on trail camera or anything in October, right? Like I probably would have left and went to Missouri, like I was planning to, right? But because I saw him in middle of October, I was like, okay, I know he's here. Like this is his. I always assumed this was his core area. I now really think that it is, right? And now I have a better idea that I actually even think like a section of this is more in play than the rest of it, if that makes sense, right? Because at one point, my buddy and I both did this. We were talking about it on the phone one day. We both basically took like the primary areas where we had him relatively consistently, dropped a pin, and then put a mile radius around it. And that was what I was scouting in October. Was I was basically scouting that mile radius around that central kind of area that we thought was kind of like, let's just call this the center of his home range, right? And then just spent time walking like that mile radius and like the little areas that I thought he might be hiding out and dropping a camera and stuff like that, just to see if I could pick him up. And and a lot of that time was probably spent for naught, but based on what I ended up learning, where he was spending a lot of his time. But the benefit of that was I really got to understand this piece a lot better for future hunts. And I basically just gave I gave this season up to either trying to kill this deer or I was going to let a mature deer teach me. Like that was my goal, right? Those were the two goals I had. It was either fill my tag with this deer. I was talking to my buddy Jake Hofer about this because he was like, man, hunting a deer like that, one specific deer in that type of country, he was like, is like a task, And I was like, yeah, I was like, but the season that I had last year, I was like, I feel like I owe it to like my development, if you will, to do this and let a mature deer, if nothing else, just teach me some lessons and probably some hard lessons. I was like, but for me, that was part of like the gratitude of the season that I had last year was like, let's do something hard this year, knowing that the success rate's probably not going to be real high. Right. But the growth I think I can get out of it, like as a hunter, but also just as a person, I was like, I think it'll be well worth it. And so that was kind of like the secondary goal.
Man, I mean, first off, that's really cool, but also it's like a missing component of a lot of people want to kill big deer, but they don't understand that that's just a part of it. Like you have to do things that are, it's not the challenge of killing a big deer alone doesn't really mean that much. without like all the other variables involved, right? And so if you're not trying something to help yourself level up a little bit, like you're just not going to get there. And that's just how it works. And the thing that I love about your story with this deer is, for a while the public land thing was so hot. It's starting to that I feel like that's like sort of died down now, and we're kind of back to leases and box blinds and like trophy. We're like back to trophy hunting again.
Right.
But public land, as bad of a rep as it gets, a lot of times can be sometimes a better option if you want a giant or you want a great hunt or you want to really learn how to do something out there. Better than good private land. And this is like nobody really wants to hear this, but I ran into this with my daughters this year, or one of my daughters anyway. The other one killed a buck right away, so she was tagged out, but one of them didn't. And so we just had a weekend in early November, and I said, let's go run that decoy. Let's do what we did last year, hunt some of the private pieces we have. Couldn't see a deer. And I told her, I said, I got a spot on public that I haven't been into for a few years, but I killed some good deer in there and I saw some big ones. And I'm like, maybe we can just roll in there and find something. And she's never done that kind of hunt. Dude, we pulled up and there's a couple old logging roads in there. It's big woods. It's thousands and thousands of acres of timber. And I got out of the truck and I could see big rubs from the truck and a scrape where these deer are scraping right by this gravel road. And I told her, I said, we're going to go back and get our stuff. We're going to walk in here and we're going to hunt. Like, we're not going to go, because I just was originally going to go walk it with her and just kind of look around. And we went in there, and because, she's crossbow hunting, she's 12, we set up on the ground, which is tough over there. It was kind of that rainy southeast wind, almost no wind kind of stuff, where it was like, we keep getting that weather pattern this year. So we sat that night, and when we walked in there, the amount of sign, and keep in mind, I had just come from Iowa, public land, but still, I didn't see sign like that in Iowa anywhere I went, and I covered some ground. Like, it was like we are in the belly of the beast right now. There's something going on here. We didn't see any deer that night, but it was rainy. The wind sucked. It was just like I was like, I don't count this as like a negative toward what we have working. Like, this was just sort of probably wasn't going to work out. So we go back to the cabin, and I'm like, do I want to go back in there with her in the morning? And I'm kind of like debating because I have easier setups on private, and we were literally hunting any buck. She'd have shot any legal buck. But I was like, it bothered me. And so I don't get reception in the cabin. So I walked outside and I pulled up on X, and I'm like, well, why are they there? Like, I didn't understand this concentration of sign. And I found a private hayfield I didn't know. It looks like a horse hayfield or whatever, 900 yards away in the exact direction that scrape line was going. And there had been a bunch of tracks on the road because we were dealing with a lot of rain. And I was like, why are the deer doing this? Like, why would they go to that chunk of big woods and leave this one when they're all kind of the same? You know what I mean? So I'm like, maybe logging activity or something. And then I found that, and I'm like, I'll bet you that's the destination. Like, it's there's no ag up there, right? And so I told my daughter, I said, tomorrow morning we're going to go the long way in. It's going to be a pain in the ass, but we're going to get ahead of these deer and go set up again in that blind. We piled some deadfalls together, whatever. And I was like, maybe we'll catch them coming back in the morning. And we got in there, and it was super foggy, dead still, kind of rainy. And we heard a stick snap like an hour into the morning, and she got ready. Deer never showed up. And I know there's like little logging roads and stuff they'll peel off of. And so I'm like, maybe he didn't get here. And I looked up, and there was like a 130-incher standing 40 yards away, and he had us pegged, and he just cut down and ran away. And I was like, man, we almost had an amazing buck on public land in the big woods when we couldn't find a forky on private 10 minutes down the road. And it's like, that shit is so cool. Just to have that opportunity. And a lot of people kind of ice themselves out of that. And they look and go, well, I have grandma's 40 acres to hunt or whatever. I'm not going to go scout the public down the road that gets pounded. And I'm like, man, you just don't know. On any given year, you don't know what you're going to find in there. And there's some opportunities that are just like, really great deer that you can work on public. And it's so freaking cool.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think especially when you start thinking about states that aren't known for good deer, um, I think that the only way that you can find like the upper caliber of deer is to go to the public, like for the most part, right? I think it's different whenever you get to like the Iowas and Kansases and Illinois and stuff like that, where it's like you can find good deer. I mean, there's good deer everywhere in those states, right? It's just a matter of being at the right on the right piece, right? Whether it's private or public or whatever. But I really think when you start talking about states like Pennsylvania, for example, I think you have a better chance to find a quality deer. And like it's like let's just say quality in the terms of age structure, right? Because that was ultimately the one guy that I ran into. He asked me where I was from because that piece that I was hunting is a little bit of a ways away from my house, a couple hours. And his question to me was like, "Well, why do you hunt here?" Right? And he'd been hunting there a long time, so it's like I think at first he was a little bit precious on the spot, where it's like people coming in that aren't from here hunting this area, you know what I mean, type of thing. Even though I'm a resident, right? But it's still like I'm not a local. Um, and I just said I looked on a map and I was looking for a place that I thought had enough land mass, that deer could hide during gun season. I was like, and get age on them so I could hunt the age class of deer that I wanted to hunt with relative consistency, and that to me was like the most important thing was like being able to find a place where they can, get to like 4.5 years old. I'll even take 3.5 because a lot of the deer around me locally don't make it to 3.5. Like that's usually like upper end age class of deer around here. You'll get your occasional 4.5, an occasional 5.5, right? But like by and large, like the more mature deer you get on camera local to me is probably like 3.5 is probably like the larger part of like the mature quote unquote age structure. Um, but this area was like big enough where I was like, yeah, I think that you can get the age on them. And I think whenever you're talking about states like PA, if you do want to hunt deer that, get to that 4.5-year-old or older kind of age class, like that's your best option, right? Because if you're hunting the back 40 and you're around a bunch of other back 40s, and it's a heavy hunting heritage state, you could throw Michigan probably into this too, um, or even Wisconsin for that matter, probably to a degree. A lot of people, and it's not whatever they want to do, however they want to hunt, but like a lot of people aren't trying to kill, the better deer in the area. They're just trying to have fun and shoot a deer. You know what I mean? And like, more power to them. But if you're a person who's looking for an age class to chase, or something like that, or a type of experience you're looking for, and those places, you're probably not going to get that on your back 40 or your grandpa's back 40 or the 150 acres that you own over here. Like it's just, it's going to probably be hit and miss as far as like, yeah, one year you might be able to, but then the next 5 you might not.
Right.
And that's kind of the situation I had, several years ago because we own property back in Western PA, like my family does. And I hunted that, growing up, I had like private property that I hunted, and then as I got older, we had like other family pieces that I hunted, and I just got to a point where I was hunting a specific buck. This is like the last time I hunted a specific deer prior to this, and I had 4 different encounters with him in late season, and like all within like marginal bow range, just couldn't ever get him shot. And so the following year, I was like, I'm gonna kill him opening day, and he came out of this creek bottom, and I saw him, and he's with a couple other deer, and those deer got spooky, and he turned around and walked away, and then someone shot him in gun season, and I knew where he was bedded, but he was on the neighbors, and that was whenever I stopped kind of hunting public land, not because think there's anything wrong with it, but I was like, it killed me to know that like I knew where that deer was at, and there wasn't anything I could do about it. I just had to wait and hope that he took the travel route that I was setting up on, right, and that things were going to break my way as opposed to getting within 50 yards of him, and having enough daylight or whatever to work him. And that was kind of the thing for me. I was like, I want to hunt a better age class of deer, and I want to be able to, if I know where a deer is at, I want to be able to go get him, you know, and that's ultimately why I ended up, where I ended up, and finding this caliber of deer to hunt this particular year was just kind of a bonus.
Right. Just to be clear, you said that's when you stopped hunting public, but you meant stopped hunting private there.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah,
that is a hard thing to get across. Where if somebody has their 40 or their 80 that's private, they don't want to go hunt public. But if you want, like you said, in some situations, you might have a better chance to find a big one if you have more room to roam. and you might have a better chance to figure out how to really work some deer. And like I say this a lot on about public land hunting, and I truly believe it. Private land is so appealing because you feel like you're only working the deer
Mm-hmm.
generally. But if you're on 40 acres and the next 40 over has 500s on it, and the next 40 over has 200s, and the next 40 over, you really are working the hunters too. You're just not thinking about it. You're thinking about
Mm-hmm.
what are the deer doing on my place now, and you can't divorce that from the fact that they're getting pushed around and shot and all kinds of stuff on other properties. You go
Mm-hmm.
out in thousands of acres of unbroken timber in PA or wherever, you accept the fact that you're going to be working against other hunters. Like you have to work the hunting pressure to some level, but you also get to work that deer maybe in his entirety and
Mm-hmm.
not worry about him hopping the fence and betting where you can't get him and somebody else might shoot him. And there is like something really appealing to that. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
I push this message on here all the time and in my foundation podcast because I believe it so much. But I'm like, if you're limiting yourself, to 40 acres and you're not happy with your hunting, or 80 acres or whatever you have, you're not out anything by going to try to figure out some of the local public land, or some of the, maybe going like you do a couple hours to a different part of the state, or I do here in Minnesota quite a bit, just to see if you can find something to work that puts you in a little bit different place and gives you a different chance to, kind of flex your muscles a little bit. That shit's fun. And that's
Yeah.
like, that is how you get way better. And, getting better at something is pretty enjoyable typically.
Yeah. And the other thing is too, is that, I guess at this point, it's like I just go where the deer are that I want to chase, right? And so whether it's that piece I was on this year or if it's stuff local, wherever the deer are that I want to chase is where I'm going to hunt. Regardless of because around me the public gets hammered, right? Like it's crazy pressure, like the pressure that this big woods piece gets. Like I think some of the locals think there's pressure there, but what I always kind of say is like, man, if you're deterred by hunting in areas where you see tree stands and flagging tape and bright eyes, dude, you will never even set up where I live. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because like
Right.
you walk into the woods and it's all over the place, and so you can't really care much about what other hunters are doing, right? Because like you would just never step foot into the woods, right? And I think that you coming from a place that like that's kind of what the pressure is like, I think is a benefit to a degree because I'm not typically deterred when I see a truck in a parking lot or I see someone out in the woods. Like for example, the deer I killed last year in Kansas, I was glassing the deer that I killed the night before, right? And I was watching a guy walk about 200 yards away from where I was watching the deer that I was wanting to kill, right? And some people would have been like, well, that's too close. Like that deer that's blowing up. Like he just walked through a bunch of stuff, right? I was like, whatever, like he's there. This deer may or may not really know that he's there. He's on a doe. Like he's probably more focused on the doe. He's gonna come out, probably tomorrow night with this doe again, right? As long as like she doesn't get bumped, or boogered where they were bedded. And so I went in the next afternoon at like 3 o'clock and I killed a Boone and Crockett deer on the ground at 5:30. You know what I mean? And there were guys all over that in trucks and stuff like that. And it was just one of those things where it's like I knew where this deer was, wasn't so concerned about what they were doing. I had a plan and I thought that I could get it done without them interfering.
Right.
And so I wasn't too broke up about other people hunting the piece necessarily. You know, Now if they walk through exactly where you're going to be, it's a little bit of a different story, right? But it's just like there were trucks there every day. You know what I
Right.
mean? But like I was I think they actually helped me because I wanted a deer in a certain spot, and that's where he ended up being. And I had seen that over the past year or two as well, right? And this was a big deer, so he was being pretty consistent. Like he wasn't going to change up unless someone made him change. And and so I wasn't put off by the fact that there were other guys hunting the area. In fact, I saw two guys walk out of where I thought he was bedded with a doe in like where he was typically bedded in this CRP the evening that I glassed him and I drove out to go back to my camp. I watched two guys walk out of where he was bedding with that doe. Right. And so it's like you would think like, oh man, that's all boogered up. But like I was like, they didn't bother him. I was like, and I'm sure he and that doe are probably used to people walking around the area because they're doing it all the time. Right. And as long as they didn't get bumped, I was like, I don't think it'll change much of what they're going to do. And sure enough, like it worked out the next day.
Dude, I think that we have a very skewed view of the impact that we put on deer. Like
Mhm.
I think for sure more hunting pressure sucks. Like
Well, yeah, for
just
sure. Yeah.
generally. But the the reality out there is, man, you can bump into them. You can have people going all over. Small game hunters come in, and you know how it is. Like how many times you've been sitting on your stand or sitting there glassing, like you said, and you see somebody burn through bird dogs, whatever, and then an hour later there's deer there, you know,
Mhm.
and or you bump one and you're like, I'm never going to see a deer here, snorted a million times, and then they come right back through. Like I ran
Mhm.
into this year in Iowa where I killed my buck. I had a whole plan going down there. The last time I drew, there wasn't hardly any hunting pressure there. This time there were freaking people everywhere. I mean,
Mhm.
it was nuts. The first four spots I went to had trucks, and I was like, okay, like I gotta recalibrate my plan because
Mhm.
I'm not working in. It's not 2020 anymore. I don't know. Something changed, and so I started looking at it and going, well, most of these guys probably aren't going in very deep. They're probably sitting obvious stuff. Like there's that, kind of first layer, and down there the woods, it's all nice deciduous forest. It's easy to walk through. It looks good. There's lots of deer, so there's tons of sign. So
Mhm.
I'm like looking at, Onyx again. I'm like, okay, I love river bottoms. I love those flats along rivers that have willows and just like that sawgrass and kind of like just that different level of habitat, right?
Mhm.
And I was like, the river that I'm hunting along is so low right now. I've never seen it like this, and I've turkey hunted and deer hunted down there a fair amount. So I'm like, there's probably better vegetation, like better nutritious vegetation for browse in those spots than anywhere else. And so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go figure that part out. And dude, it was like a 10-minute walk. And this is Iowa, of course, but there were a lot of people hunting down there. And there's tracks along the river, and I could see a blind in this one spot. I'm like, okay, but you get in there, and you're like, well, the deer have been browsing like crazy, and here's a good crossing here, here's a good crossing there. The cover's different. There's actually like vibrant green plants growing along the river. I'm like, this is probably just the next layer in, and we had a bunch of deer around us. Decoyed one down the river and shot him, and it was like all I had to do was sort of like forget about all the trucks. Like, forget that, like, this is not what I expected, and just go in and find them, and then you work
Yep.
them. And a lot
Yep.
of people just aren't, you know, they bring they bring a sort of a set of rules to public land that just doesn't necessarily apply. Like if you knocked on a door somewhere and walked in and you were going to go sit, you could go sit a field corner and shoot a deer, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe probably not going to do that on public land in a lot of places. Like it's going to take a little bit. Like you mentioned about that big one you were after, how there's no bed to food, food to bed type of thing. Like you're not,
Yep.
the cornfield isn't over there and the river bottom isn't over there. Like it doesn't work that way. But you're like, there's soft edges in the woods. And I'm starting to think about this. In fact, I just wrote a foundations episode about it, like the connective tissue that deer use. Like that river bottom buck I killed, there were 3 river bottom flats, and the connective tissue was the shortest route between them to stay hidden and stay in those willows and shit like that, and just not go into that wide open woods where more people were. And it's like it's a linear thing, right? Like if they're over here and they want to get over there, what are they going to use to get there? And that
Mhm.
soft edge, like you're talking about, those real soft edges in the woods, the big woods, they just use them. They use them
Mhm.
for cover, they use them for browse, and they're just like one of those things that a lot of people would walk through and just never pick up on. But that's
Mhm.
like, you're hunting public land, like you're working a giant deer. What is like what can you use to your advantage when you can't use those terrain traps and an obvious A to B type of food to bed thing or something? And that
Yeah.
that shit's so fun.
Yeah, that was that was probably my biggest learning curve, of when I first started scouting and then eventually hunting this place. And I got to give props to my 2 buddies I keep kind of referencing, and I'm not mentioning them in name because I'm not sure if they ever want their name mentioned. Like I've literally like the one won't even come on my podcast. Like he's like, I'm not coming on. So, um, but because when I first started up there, my one buddy, I don't remember how we met exactly, but he was like, "Hey, let's go walk the woods or whatever." And just because I was not sure whenever I was seeing sign if it was like if that sign was good or not for that particular area, right? Because I wasn't seeing a lot of it and I wasn't seeing big sign, right? And so I just needed some context. And so we walked the woods a little bit and hung some trail cameras and stuff like that. And I was showing him like, hey, this is the type of stuff I'm finding. He's like, no, that's good. And I was like, okay, cool. And then I ended up meeting my other buddy. Those two were friends. So that's how I met the other guy. And then he and I would walk the woods and stuff together, and they're both really, really good hunters. And so I was able to they expedited my learning curve in the area by kind of helping me understand like what good sign is for that area, what deer like to use in that area, how they kind of use the soft edges and stuff like that a little bit, more effectively, where you're typically going to find like sign typically, right? Or where you're going to find pockets of deer. And so a place that would have taken me probably 5 years to start to learn to actually be able to hunt effectively, like, with their help, it's like I was able to kind of figure out what I needed to know within like 3 years, which was, props to them for being cool and, and helping me out. But you're right. It's like, it's figuring all that little stuff out was not just helpful for that area, but it's also changes how I look at other landscapes as well. Right. So whether I'm in Kansas or whatever, like you start to kind of, you and I talk about this all the time. You start to create these like analogs between different places, right? Where it's like, I've never been here before and I've never hunted this type of terrain, but man, it feels a lot like this place I was in Kansas, or this place I was in Missouri or whatever, right? Like this creek crossing is not in Missouri, but it's in PA, but man, it feels a lot like that one setup that I had that was like a drainage that went into the lake, to this lake, And
Right.
so it's stuff like that you start to kind of pick up on. And then, ultimately what happened this, for me this year is like, I've already kind of started looking at the map and going like, what did this deer teach me, that I can use to look at this landscape a little bit differently and start to like find other areas I want to explore. Right. And so I've already kind of started going through the map and kind of like dropping pins in areas that aren't even necessarily close to that particular area, right? It's like, what are the things that this place had that allowed this deer, and a couple others to reach a certain maturity or a certain caliber, and where can I find that in some of these other pockets, right? And then the second part of that is like, um, where can I use like some interesting access to find these? Right. And so like I'm starting to like double down on it a little bit, because I'm like, this is a place, when you find certain places or certain types of setups, there's a reason why, if you're in any state that doesn't grow giants consistently, right? If you're finding them somewhere, right, there's a reason why, right? And it's just like when you're trying to hunt a deer, it's like you don't take things at face value. You ask like, well, why did he do this? Why did he go here? Why was he here on this date? And so what I'm starting to do now is ask like, well, why was he able to grow so old in that particular area, right? Like, what did it have that let him do that, right? And then where else do I see that, like, similarities, right? And like, let me go explore those, because chances are, when you're talking about big woods like that, there's deer in this area that I probably have never seen a person before, right? Like, I feel pretty confident in saying that,
Yep.
And so with that, it's like, then they have the opportunity to get age on them, right? And so, there's got to be more like him somewhere. You just have to, put the work in to try to find them, right? And I'm not hung up on trophy hunting necessarily, but boy, it's fun to chase them like that, because they give you a different lens into their world than other than younger deer just don't give you, right? They just don't make the mistakes. They don't leave as much sign. They make you work for everything, and it's just a different experience. And that to me is like the fun part, right? Like, it's just that experience. So like, give me like 130-inch, like 7-year-old deer. It's like, I'd love to chase that deer. You know what I mean? Like, cause that's just, he's been around the block, man. Like, you're not going to kill him sitting on the inside corner of like a food source. It's just not going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to have to kill him in this funky little setup somewhere that like you wouldn't even think that a deer would, walk through that area. or whatever the case is, you know?
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to say. You know, listening to you, I am not a one buck hunter generally, but
Mhm.
every once in a while I find one that makes me a one buck hunter quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the one thing about, you know, the times that I've done it, it makes me think about deer in such a different way than I usually do. You know, I had this buck in southeastern Minnesota on this farm, you know, quite a few years ago that was probably pushing booner, really cool deer, high and tight, just a cool ass buck. And that dude was spending a lot of time in a valley on this one property, and he taught me so much about like like the real nocturnal nature of some of these deer, but also just thinking about individual trails. I mean, there was a trail that he took back to go to bed, very consistent, and it was like it bothered me so much because I knew the trail, I knew where to set up, and I knew that he wasn't coming through there in daylight.
Mhm.
And it just like instead of thinking about that farm like I usually do, where I'm like, where can I run into a decent buck? Like I just want a good one. Like I don't, you know, should I sit this part? This part's a big farm. I was like obsessed with that stupid ass valley, scouting it, looking for shed antlers in it, running trail cameras on different trails leading out. And it was like, it kind of occurred to me, and I never killed that deer, by the way, but it occurred to me like I'm learning more about this particular area in one season than I have in 20 years of hunting there because this deer likes to use it. And that was it. You know, and you mentioned how we talk a lot about how, you know, figuring out you know, why did that buck have the opportunity to get to 200 inches out there? How did he get that age on him? Where were his sanctuaries? Like, what
Mhm.
was his like hideout strategy? How did he do it? When you start figuring that stuff out and taking it on the road with you, or taking it to another place, or using that on another giant you find 3 years down the road, it's so beneficial. And you mentioned that, and you said something way earlier about figuring out that this deer had a very distinctive rub pattern,
Mhm.
and it reminded me. So I killed a buck a long time ago, probably '08, '09, something like that. I had bow hunted this deer in north central Minnesota. He's like a 130-inch nine pointer, but he was the biggest deer on this place. I had 80 acres to hunt, and he was living in a cattail slough. And I'll tell you what, that son of a bitch just had that little sanctuary figure. He was unapproachable most of the time. And you'd see him in there, you know, like I glassed him in the summer, and I kept finding these tracks. The biggest tracks I found on the farm had this like wonky kind of toe shape where it was like a very distinct. And I remember like that's got to be that deer. Like there's probably not another deer here that's like of that maturity level. And I ended up killing that buck with a rifle, like totally just scummed into him. Bought a rifle tag that I'd never bought before. Walked into that cattail sioux like 6 days in the deer season, and he followed a doe through there, and I thumped him, and it was stupid. But that deer had that distinctive hoof pattern, so it was him. And so even just like I think about that all the time now because I'm hunting cattail sloughs a lot, and where I live is very sandy, so tracks are a big deal. Like we just, you know, like I use
Mhm.
tracks a lot, and I'm like, man, I think back to that deer in that season often. And it's not, you know, it's not like a huge buck. It wasn't like a particularly special thing, but the journey that that deer took me on is like still, there's still payoffs to this day from it. And that's, I mean, it's like I kind of shit on Mark
Yeah.
and his like naming bucks and stuff like that sometimes. But really, this one buck thing, well, I shit on him for a lot of reasons. Most justified, I would say. But
Right.
that style of just going, that's the one, and I'm gonna figure it out. That
Right.
brings you to a different place as a deer hunter, and it's definitely can be like very beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. And that was the biggest thing for me was, just how much more I had to pay attention to detail on this hunt, hunting this particular deer. And how much more keyed into detail I was than on other hunts, right? For whatever reason. Well, for an obvious reason, right? Um, and it made me kind of think like, man, like you should be keyed in like this all the time, like when you're hunting, and a lot of times I'm not, it's like, I'm just kind of like, hey, there's some rubs, it's like, and oh, cool. Yeah. Oh, there's some scrapes. And Why are they there? All right, cool. It's set up here, but it's because I'm not hunting a specific deer and trying to figure out what this deer is going to do. I'm just trying to figure out what some deer will do. Right. And it becomes different if you're looking for a specific one, because it's just like when you think about sociology versus psychology, right? Sociology is the study of groups, right? And psychology is the study of the individual, right? And hunting a specific deer is like taking a psychology course and not a sociology course, right? It's like I'm trying to understand one, right? Not I don't care how the group, because that one, especially if they got age on them, like they don't act like the other deer, especially whenever they get to that older age class, right? Like they're just this deer particularly, like you would see some like trail camera intel on him where he was with other deer. I can think of like a couple, but like by and large, most of the stuff I had on of him, like he was by himself. Like he wasn't very often with other deer, even in the summer. Like I remember, I can think of like maybe 2 years ago, like maybe a couple of trail camera pictures that we got of him on this one scrape where he was with another buck. But it wasn't more than like a handful of pictures, right? And it might even been the same from the same day, like just like the rapid burst or whatever. And then this year and last year, me personally, like on the cameras that I was running, like I don't have him on camera with any deer ever, you know? And so, which would make sense because when he was like, we got, he was young, he was a younger deer, right? And so maybe a little bit more amiable to be around, or maybe a little bit more interested in being around other deer or whatever. But it seemed like now as he got older, like he had no interest in being around other deer, no matter what time of year it was. He really kind of became a recluse, and like that was kind of telling, right? Not just for him, but like how I think about whenever I'm trying to find another good deer or an older deer. And then there was like, I won't mention what they were, but there were two like habitat types that I found in proximity to one another that I felt like was the thing, right? For why he was spending time in an area. And I was talking to another buddy of mine who hunts a lot of big woods, and he was on a hammer this year. I think he missed like a 160-inch deer, public land in Pennsylvania. And I was talking to him about it, and he knew. I sent him a picture of like a scrape and a rub or whatever, and where I was at, he's like, oh man, he's like, I love that area. He's like that habitat right there. He was like, it like, he's like, you'd be surprised how often I find the biggest deer in those areas, right? And so that was kind of like when the light bulb went off. I was like, oh wait a minute, okay. I was like, it's this piece here that's next to this piece, and it makes a lot of sense why he's here now. And so when I say I start to look for those things now, it's like if I can find a place where those two types of habitat are adjacent to one another, it's like that to me is like where like the light bulb starts to go off, right? Um, and that's those are the types of lessons that you take with you. As far as cutting tracks, like I tried, like this area, a lot of grass, leaf cover, hard soil, like hard ground, or you're in a swamp with like mud and heavy, dense foliage or whatever that you're not going to see a track. But I did cut a good track on like the next to last day that I was hunting. And I know that wasn't this deer. And oddly enough, it was like by where I parked my truck. I didn't see it when I pulled in the morning, and I was getting ready. I was coming out at night and had my headlamps down and opened up my back door. And I was like, holy shit, man, that's a big track. And got down and looked at it. It was like the size of my hand, you know? And so I was like, all right, it wasn't in the right area for it to be him, but I was like, okay. And the crazy thing is I think it's a younger deer. It was on hard ground too. So it wasn't like there was splay or anything like that. You know what I mean? But his hooves were still kind of pointy. You know what I mean? So where it's like, it's a big track, but it was still kind of a younger deer because they weren't starting to round quite yet, So, maybe next year for that guy.
So you got a text with a picture of this giant dead, and you don't know how he died.
No. It's the area he was in. It could have been a hunter that shot him and like just never found him, possibly. The picture that I saw, like there wasn't any entry or exit wounds, and I could see back to like midway through his ribs or whatever, and so it doesn't look like he was shot, unless it was like a really bad shot, like guts type of situation. And the coyotes had got to him, and I could only see like basically from like the back of his ribs down, so I couldn't see like his hindquarters or his guts. Or he could have got hit on the road, So that's, don't know, I don't know if we'll ever figure it out. You know, and it doesn't really matter, to me, honestly. It's like he's not there to hunt anymore, which is a bummer. But you just hate to see, I hope, fingers crossed, that a hunter shot him and that they get to claim him, like that's what my hope is. Just because I hate to see an animal like that, get hit on the freaking road and like end up in the game commission, like get scrapped or whatever, so.
Yeah. So you're moving on from this.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter how he was killed because now he's just dead. But it's, I mean, it sucks that it played out that way, but it's also just like such a gift to have that opportunity for a season. I mean, I know when I talked to you the other night, dude, you were burned, and this was before you knew he was dead, and you were kind of running on E, but that's what that kind of thing is going to do to you. But you don't, I mean, you're not going to get that chance. That's just not going to happen very often. It's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think in total, from October 5th till I think the last day I hunted was like the 17th or something like that, I think was the last day that I hunted. I ended up hunting him 26 days and ended up sleeping in my truck or in my trailer, like, because there were days where I didn't hunt, or it was a Sunday that I didn't hunt, or it was the day where it's like, well, the first day I was going to hunt because the wind was right and the weather was right, but then it got warm, so I wasn't hunting the next day, and then I was going to hunt the day after. So there was like some of that where I was just spending time there. So it's like 126 days, and I think I slept in my truck or my trailer like 30 couple days or something like that overall within like that month and a half time period. So about half the days that you could possibly hunt him, like I hunted him essentially,
Right.
And my wife, gotta love her, man. Cause she was like, never said like, when are you coming home or what are you doing? Like there was never any of that. She was always like, when I get back, she's like, when you going back up? And I'm like, I would literally come home on like a Sunday, go to jujitsu, train, and be like, yeah, I'm leaving Tuesday after jujitsu. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm going to be there Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday next week, And so there was a lot of that, but I will say this because, I think we get wrapped, and I certainly did. Like I got wrapped up into this, and there were a few moments where I would try to remind myself, like when the grind's happening and like you're just not feeling it right, and you want to be anywhere but in the woods at that moment for whatever reason. I try to just remind myself to be, and I kept saying this to myself, like be where your feet are. Like be where your feet are. Don't wish the time away. Don't wish you were somewhere else. There is no place better to be in the world than where you're at right now. Right. Just like in general. Right. Cause it's really easy, especially when things aren't going your way or you're not feeling like you're on him or whatever the case is, where you can really start to kind of get down. And, there was an older fellow that I met. He's in his 60s. He's retired. And whenever I'd be sleeping in my truck, he just so happened to like to park and sleep at the same spot because you can really see the stars in this area. And he's retired. And so he has a little setup in the back of his truck that he sleeps in. And so the first night, because this all started in August because there was an area I thought I could kill him in. And I needed to see what the thermals were going to do. And I got the right wind that I would hunt that area on. And so I went up in August before I left to go elk hunting in Idaho, slept in the bed of my truck, got up at like, 5:00 in the morning and hiked in so I could get into that tree, literally climbed into the tree with my saddle, like got set up like I was going to hunt, obviously no bow or anything, and set up and just sat there and waited for the sun to come up to see what the thermal was going to do when the sun came up based on that prevailing wind that I was getting that day. Right. So that's kind of how obsessed I was. Like I was there in the summer, like sleeping in my truck, like getting into setups, like to check thermals and stuff. And he happened to be there that night when I pulled in. And I'm like, man, who the hell is in this parking spot? You know what I mean? I'm like, gee, it's like, does this guy know about this big deer? And like, I'm already battling like some guy like in August, Right. And older guy, he hunted the area a lot. Told him what I was up to. And so he was like, he hunts that general area. And he was like, hey, I'm going to stay out of this area. If you're on something good, I don't want to booger you up. He's like, so I'm not going to hunt this. I'm going to go over this other area. We exchanged numbers and stuff. And he would text me every so often. And I went up a couple different weekends to, to scout and do stuff. And he was there almost every time, right? He was doing some drywall work for, he's retired, but he was doing some like freelance drywall work for like a buddy of his that he knew in that area. And he would just go there and sleep in the evenings, right? Because he just liked the stars and he likes to camp and he loves the fish. He's a woodsman,
Right.
And he just thought it was the coolest thing that I was trying to kill this particular deer. And so we really hit it off. And he let me know, forget, we got on the topic of like family or something like that. And on the topic of wives or whatever the case is, and maybe he was like, "Oh, you spend a lot of time up here." And I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Well, maybe I said something about, what's your wife think of you camping out here or whatever the case is, what I mean? Like just talking some smack." And he let me know that his wife of like, whatever it was, like 40 years had passed away. Right. Which was, obviously sad. He's widowed. And so we were kind of talking about it a little bit. He asked me how long I'd been married. And I told him, a little over 20 years now. And I just asked him, hey, because he's a happy-go-lucky guy, man. He's had a good life, and I was like, what's the key to that kind of marriage where it's like you get to do all this outdoor stuff, and and because he's always done that, and he said, just make sure that you always give more than you take, was what he told me, right? And so I remember I was sitting in the tree on the day before I came home, and I was just thinking to myself, like reminding myself to be where my feet are. And I thought to myself, back to that conversation, and I asked myself, have I given more than I've taken to this point? And the answer was no. And I was like, I've taken my fair share this fall. It's time for me to go home. And so I just kind of made the decision then that was going to be the last day I was going to hunt. And then subsequently the next day I found out that deer got killed. And it was his words of wisdom that kind of like was like, because I was struggling, man. I was like, I don't want to go home. I was getting prepared to like work and hunt from the trailer for like the next week. You know what I mean? Like this week actually. And I was just thinking about him and what he told me, the advice he gave me. And I was like, nope, I've taken my fair share. I was like, it's time for me to go home and be where my feet are. My feet should be there. And so, we get crazy on big deer, and love chasing them. But at the end of the day, they don't matter. And that was kind of, my one buddy or, mutual friend of ours, Chad, texted me about it. And I said, that I was like, it sucks, that deer got killed. I was like, but, in the grand scheme of things, that deer didn't matter a whole lot. It's like, I learned a lot. I had a great time chasing him. I was like, but man, I'm a fortunate guy with the life that I have. I was like, and I need to remember that, above all else, and everything else will work itself out.
Dude, I'm so glad you said that because it's so true. That deer's cool as hell, right? I mean, that's just that's like a special thing. But the thing that's really cool about it is just the challenge. Mm-hmm. Like just finding that challenge, trying to level up to it, getting as close as you can, putting in that work, doing your thing, seeing what it's all about, and then okay, well now he's dead. Like what's next? Like how are you going to keep yourself going as a person? And we joked about this a little bit, but I gotta ask this before we wrap this up. Are you going to take that stick bow out and go stick a Forky or something now just to get like a palate cleanser out? I think you should.
Yeah, it's laying right back there. I've been shooting it the past couple of days because, I basically was going to plan to hunt with it all year was my plan. And then this deer showed up and I was like, man, I'm not going to take a risk of like, having an encounter with this deer and it'd be the first year I'm using a stick bow and screw it up. And so I put it on the back burner and then picked it back up. And I'm going to take that out. I'm going to go out Saturday to some spots, a spot locally, where I know there's some deer, and we'll see what comes through. I haven't checked a single trail camera locally, so I have no clue what's happening around me. So it's going to literally just be, probably kayaking into a spot that I like, actually where I killed my buck last year, and kayak into there and take the stick bow along and see if we can make some magic happen. And that's going to be, that's probably what's going to transpire. There's one other deer that I'm kind of interested in. He has a kind of time frame. He's a late season deer, I guess I should say. And so we'll probably make a run at him if I don't kill anything in the next like 2 weeks here, at home. But yeah, that's kind of that's the plan. We're just going to have fun now. The stress is over. You know what I mean? It's like, it's, you have an experience like that and he's not there. And so the pressure's all kind of off at this point. It's like everything's gravy, so there's no, if I get deer walks in and I got the stick bow in my hand, I get fired up. I'm gonna let one rip. That's the game plan.
Dude, I love it, buddy. Truth from the Stand podcast. Where can people find you out there, Clint?
The .com, truthfromthestand.com is the website. All the stuff's on there. YouTube channels, Truth from the Stand, Instagram, Apple, Spotify, all the normal places where you can find content. You can find my nonsense there too.
Lots of great guests on there. You do an awesome job with that podcast. I've been on there a bunch of times. Sorry you didn't get that deer, buddy, but it sounds like it still worked out pretty well for you. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I love chatting with you.
You too, buddy. I appreciate you having me, and hope Mark's feeling better.
That's it for this week, folks. Make sure to tune in every week for more whitetail goodness. I'm your guest host, Tony Peterson, and this has been the Wired to Hunt podcast, which is brought to you by First Light. I want to thank you guys so much for your support. We truly appreciate it here at MeatEater. And if you want some more content, you can head on over to themeateater.com and get your fill. Podcast, video series, articles, maybe do a little shopping, maybe find a recipe, whatever. Maybe you're just bored with your commute, or you're going to head out on some late season trip somewhere and you need to fill the time. You need to go check out Clay's Bear Grease podcast, Brent Reeves' This Country Life. We have a lot of really cool shows out there for you to listen to that aren't whitetail related necessarily, but they're pretty dang interesting and pretty fun to listen to. Go check them out at themeateater.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening.
It's that time of the year again. I'm back. Marcus Kenyon, how are you, you son of a gadwall? You look terrible. I'm just kidding, or am I? I'm sorry I'm late. I crashed my recumbent bicycle into the side of a Quiznos, and I know what you're thinking. I am as sober as a newborn blue crab. I swear to you, this is just kombucha. I'm watching the gut health. You gotta do it as you get older. Also, I'm wearing this ankle bracelet that makes a beep beep sound if I have a drop of the stuff. Also alerts the authorities, who in turn alert my parole officer, so there'll be none of that in the studio today. I promise you. Let's get go. Oh, you're queuing it up already. Okay, thought we'd learned a lesson this year, but I guess not. Here we go.
I love those B.I.G. big white tails. Those stinky rotten B.I.G. big white tails. I love those B.I.G. big W-H-I-T-E tails. I love those B.I.G. big white tails.
Big white tails, big white tails, big white tails are great. Oh, what fun it is to sit in a freezing cold tree all day. Big white tails, big white tails, big white tails are great. Oh, what fun it is to sit in a freezing cold tree all day. Dashing through the woods, for the morning light turns gray. Across the fields and draws, creeping all the way. Shh, 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 I climb into the tree. Big bucks are on the way. What fun it is to sit and wait for a gosh darn deer all day. Oh, big... I'm sorry, what is this? Pizzicato strings? Who do you think I am, Enya? Get this out of here. I don't want to hear it. Thank you. Big white tails, big white tails, big white tails are great. Oh, what fun it is to sit in a freezing cold tree all day. My hopes and dreams are high. The rut is finally here. Mark said it's the most wonderful time to kill a white-tailed deer. Pinch points and bedding's where you'll find me hanging 20 feet in a tree. Grunt tubes my bow and Spectre camo, this really can't be beat. A day or two ago, I thought that this was fun. But now I'm frozen to my seat and the good times, they are gone. I've ate up all my snacks. My hands and toes are numb. And when I climbed down from my stand, that son of a buck decided to come.
I love those B.I.G. big white tails. Those stinky rotten B.I.G. big white tails.
I love those B.I.G. big W-H-I-T-E tails. I love those big white tails. all day. I don't know why this is happening. I swear to God. Oh, officer, what seems to be the problem here? Oh, this? I don't know why this is happening. It must be a malfunction. You know, sometimes this happens when the batteries run low. You don't need to smell that. That's just kombucha. Okay, yes, you've got me. It's Everclear and Pacific Cooler Capri Sun. I am so sorry. I don't know why my life has brought me here. Marcus, I'm so sorry. Enjoy the rut or whatever. Good luck. Boys, good to see you. Hayden, it's been a while. Hey, sorry I'm late. I crashed my Pontiac Aztec into a light pole and had to walk the rest of the way, but I'm here now. That's what matters. Can you give me a glass of scotch, please, Hayden? Just 2 rocks in there. I don't like ice. We're starting already. This is happening. Okay, just give me the glass. Thank you. Okay, here we go. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. With the rut now just starting and dashing and darting and lanes cut and cleared. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. There's far too much ice in this glass. It's the happiest season of all. There's got to be at least 12 cues. With grunting and bleeding and cold fronts and sleeting the last weeks of fall. It's the happiest season of all. There'll be pictures for posting and bragging and boasting and truck beds with big bucks in tow. There'll be narrow missed stories and tales of near glories of booner bucks missed with our bows. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. Not just one, maybe 2. There'll be no does of blowing and luminox glowing and blood trails so clear. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. Hey, excuse me, can I have a napkin, please? I just spilled some scotch on my loafers. I can't have dirty loafers in the studio. Yeah, thank you. Tailgate beers for drinking and big bucks a slinking and chasing and scent checking does. There'll be fighting and scraping and no more escaping and arrows shot true hitting home. Key change? What? No one told me that. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. I was very unprepared for this. There'll be much morning sitting and cold fronts hitting the dawn crisp and clear. It's the most wonderful time. Oh, the most wonderful time. Yes, the most wonderful time to kill deer. There's too much ice in the glass. 2 rocks.